My father refused to walk me down the aisle because my golden sister had a housewarming party that day, but he called me desperately when I found a replacement. For a long time, I always knew my parents loved my older sister Vicky more than me. She was the planned child, while I was the result of an accidental pregnancy just 10 months later. They probably didn't even want me, but decided to keep the pregnancy anyway. My mother's parents had passed away before I was born, but my father's parents were very much alive, so they took on a significant role in raising me. Grandma and Grandpa were the constants in my life, providing the love and support that I often felt was lacking from my own parents. I remember so many occasions when my parents left me behind with my grandparents and only took my sister on trips. When I was young, I didn't mind because it was fun living with my grandparents. But as I grew older, around 6 or 7 years old, I realized how unfair it all was. My issue wasn't just with my parents, it was also with my sister Vicky. Although I didn't harbor resentment towards Vicky, I couldn't help but feel like an unwanted addition to the family. She knew this and made me feel like an outsider every day in my own home. She always competed with me for everything, whether it was grades, our parents' attention, or even the smallest achievements. It felt like a constant battle for validation, and I was always on the losing side because my parents always favored her. As a result, I felt really inferior, and we never quite got along. Our relationship seemed more like a perpetual competition, with her always coming out victorious. Once, she wanted to befriend a group of girls but was too nerdy and scared to approach them. One of the girls and I had art classes together, so she introduced me to the rest of the group, and we all used to hang out together. Vicky was so jealous of this that she got my parents to talk to me about including her. Whenever she was with us, she would try to fight, but my mother called me selfish while my father said she was my sister and I should take care of her. Reluctantly, I agreed and introduced Vicky to the rest of the girls. Vicky, who didn't have many friends, could seem overly enthusiastic, constantly trying to impress the girls in our group, often resulting in annoyance. Despite her efforts, she struggled to find her place among them, and the uncomfortable tension between Vicky and the other girls was always palpable. For instance, one of the girls liked a boy, so Vicky took it upon herself to approach the boy and let him know the girl liked him. He laughed because he wasn't interested and told everyone, which embarrassed the girl. After that, the girls clearly told me they didn't want Vicky at our meetups, so I agreed. However, Vicky didn't take it well. She threw a tantrum when she found out the girls didn't want anything to do with her and insisted to our parents that I shouldn't spend time with these bad girls either, as she was my sister and I should stand up for her. I refused and told her it was her fault they didn't want to be friends with her, but my parents, as always, sided with her. They lectured me about how Vicky didn't have bad intentions and that I should try to convince the girls to forgive Vicky. But if they didn't, then I should distance myself from them too. I refused and stood my ground. I enjoyed hanging out with them and, unlike Vicky, I wasn't going to jeopardize my friendship in any way. I told my parents I'd had enough and it wasn't my responsibility to find friends for Vicky. My parents were angry and gave me the cold shoulder for weeks, but I'm glad I stood firm. This group of girls has remained my friends to this day, and they are basically like sisters to me. I've cried with them, laughed with them, and shared some of the most significant moments of my life. That wasn't the only reason Vicky came to hate me. There was also another incident with a boy she had a crush on, a boy I had no idea about, and who sat with me in some classes because we were friends. He tried to ask me to the prom, but I politely declined because I was already going with someone I liked. Later, when Vicky found out, she made a huge fuss about it, telling my parents how I always took the things she wanted and flirted with the boy, knowing how she felt about him for months. She called me a bunch of nasty words no one should say to their sister and told my parents how she wished I wasn't her sister. My mother sided with her, telling me it was wrong what I did and that, as a sister, I should respect the girl code. I tried to tell them I wasn't even interested in the boy and had turned down his invitation, so she was free to ask him if she wanted. But Vicky refused to let it go. Looking back, I think she knew the boy would have rejected her anyway, so she just wanted to lash out at me because he had asked me instead of her. Once, my dad took me out for ice cream, telling me he wanted to spend some father-daughter time with me. This had never happened before, so I was really happy. However, he started asking me a bunch of questions, like if my boyfriend and I were being careful, if my boyfriend came from a good family, or if my boyfriend and I did drugs. I was taken aback by his line of questioning and asked him what he meant by all this. That's when my dad revealed that Vicky had been making up stories, telling my parents for months that I did drugs and drank alcohol with my boyfriend. This was a complete lie, and I showed my dad my phone to verify that Vicky was lying. Later, when my dad confronted her about all the lies, she tried to justify that no one our age just hangs out with a boy and that I was hiding things from everyone. I was so angry I yelled at her for trying to create unnecessary drama and told her it wasn't my fault she didn't have anyone to hang out with but needed to stay out of my life. Vicky didn't take it well and hit me. This came out of nowhere, as she had never been physically violent before. My nose started bleeding as I fell to the floor, clutching my face in pain. My parents rushed me to the hospital, and all the while, they begged me not to press charges against Vicky. They said it would ruin her life, while I sat in the back seat, clutching my face. Vicky didn't even care or apologize. Later, when the nurse asked me about the incident, I told her the truth, and she called Child Protective Services. My parents were furious with me for involving CPS, seeing it as a betrayal of family loyalty. In their eyes, Vicky's actions were dismissed as a mere accident, an isolated incident that didn't warrant such drastic intervention. They pleaded with the authorities, insisting that Vicky wasn't a danger to me and that her actions were out of character. In the end, Vicky was released, but my parents were warned that they would be closely monitored in case of any other accidents. As you can imagine, Vicky was really upset, as were my parents. Later, my parents told me they were disappointed in me for trying to ruin my sister's life. My mom started crying and said I was tearing the family apart by involving outsiders. My dad's disappointment was palpable, always having words loaded with reproach as he questioned my decision to escalate the situation. I firmly told them I wanted Vicky out of my life, and they agreed. I felt guilty for involving the authorities, but for the first time, I felt safe in my own home. Once I saw that she had been formally warned, my parents had a separate conversation with her, and from that day on, she stopped talking to me completely. I prefer this much more than having her constantly hovering around me or trying to insert herself into my life. When my grandparents found out about this incident, they asked me to pack my things so I could live with them for the rest of high school. They informed my parents, who didn't protest much, so I went to live with my grandparents. Unlike my parents' home, I felt safe and loved here. The remaining days of high school went well, and I made lasting memories with my friends. My parents never visited or called me all that time. I knew they were happy with their beloved daughter, so I never tried to contact them, although it hurt that they could discard me so easily, as if I was nothing. When I graduated from high school, my parents made the day about Vicky. They didn't even congratulate me or approach me, and I felt like a stranger to them. However, my grandparents were there and scolded my parents for being so obvious about their favoritism. I don't know what my grandpa said, but my dad later awkwardly approached me and congratulated me. Later, I found out I was accepted into a good university with a full scholarship. I was very happy about it because I was afraid to ask my parents for financial help. I informed my grandparents about it, and they took me out to a nice restaurant to celebrate. After dinner, my grandma posted pictures of me on her Facebook account, writing a long caption about how proud she was of me for being an exceptional student. Our relatives soon found out and joined in the congratulations. I guess some of them might have contacted my parents, who had no idea about any of this. Instead of feeling happy about it, my mother called me the next day to say Vicky had locked herself in her room, crying because she hadn't been accepted into any university, and that I was consciously trying to make my sister feel bad about her grades by talking to all our relatives. She told me it was all my fault because, apparently, she was depressed after the CPS incident and had been pushed to get bad grades. I was incredibly heartbroken that my own mother could blame me for something like this, so that was the last time I spoke to her. My grandparents helped me move to my university dormitory. Since my high school boyfriend's university was far away from mine, we broke up, so I entered university single. The breakup had been hard, but I was excited to meet new people. This is where I met Rob. He and I were both freshmen, and we spent half our days in the library. Rob was different from anyone I had ever met before. He was a quiet person and liked to study, which was similar to me, and we quickly found common ground in our shared love for academia. As the weeks turned into months, our friendship blossomed into something deeper, and I realized I had developed feelings for Rob that went beyond mere friendship. Being the extrovert, I was quite direct about my feelings for Rob, and I was surprised to learn he felt the same way. We started dating and have been together for 8 years. My grandparents have met Rob and simply adore him. I've met Rob's parents, who literally treat me like their own daughter. Sometimes, Rob's mother has even confided in me how she always wished for a daughter, so she is happy that Rob has met a wonderful person like me. To be honest, this is the first time I am surrounded by family members who appreciate me and don't resent me. I have told Rob stories about my childhood, and he listens and knows how my relationship with Vicky is. Over these last 8 years, my parents have barely contacted me except for the occasional birthday message if they remembered, but that's all. Recently, Rob and I got engaged. He proposed to me while we were hiking to our usual spot to watch the sunrise, and it was a dream proposal. It was so sweet to see how nervous he was while asking the question, and I had no doubts in my mind when I accepted. I posted engagement photos on my Instagram and also informed my grandparents about it. They were so happy for me and congratulated us on our future. I guess the news must have spread because my parents called me out of the blue to congratulate me. I thought it was just a casual conversation since we hadn't talked in years. They asked about my life, my job, my apartment before my dad directly asked if he could walk me down the aisle. I was surprised by his sudden question since moments earlier, he had no idea where I worked. I told him I hadn't thought about it yet. My dad said it would be embarrassing if I didn't invite them and others would question it, so it would be better if he walked me down the aisle. I told my parents I didn't even know if I would invite them to my wedding since we hadn't been in contact, but this upset my parents. My mom started telling me how disappointed she was in my response, emphasizing the importance of family and tradition. She continued saying they would always be my parents, no matter what, and I should leave the past behind. Part of me was tempted to listen to my parents and accept my dad's offer because I wanted our relationship to be repaired. But another part of me was hesitant, fearful of opening myself up to possible disappointments and wounds again. However, I was about to start a new chapter of my life in a few months, so I told my dad he could walk me down the aisle, and he seemed delighted. During the wedding preparations, I contacted my high school friends, with whom I had always kept in touch despite the physical distance that had grown between us due to our careers. I told them how I wanted the group to reunite and that I wanted them to be my bridesmaids. There were many tears of happiness and congratulations, and without hesitation, they accepted my invitation to be part of my bridal party since it was an opportunity for us to reunite. We all planned to go to Las Vegas to celebrate my bachelorette party, while Rob had a separate bachelor party with his friends. My friends and I posted many photos of the party, and overall everyone had a great time. However, when I returned home, my parents called to inform me how disappointed they were that I hadn't invited Vicky to be part of the celebration. I told them there was no way I would involve Vicky in my bachelorette party and that I didn't want her to be part of my life. This surprised my parents, and they asked what I meant. So, I clarified that Vicky's actions, particularly her history of lies and gossip, had left me deeply hurt and distrustful of her intentions. I couldn't imagine inviting her to such an intimate and joyous occasion as my bachelorette party, knowing her presence would make my party less happy. I also informed my parents that this was why she wasn't invited to my wedding either. Hearing this, my parents lost their temper. They complained that I had no right to exclude my sister from my wedding and that it was my duty as her sister to include her in such important events. They told me Vicky was excited to see me after learning about my wedding. I was confused and asked my parents what gave her that idea since we hadn't spoken in so long. But my parents ignored my concerns, saying this wasn't how sisters behaved. I told them they had to understand that my relationship with Vicky was complicated, and after everything that had happened, I simply didn't feel comfortable having her as part of my wedding. Not once had she apologized to me for everything she had put me through. However, my parents generally ignored my words. My mother kept saying how she wanted everything to be resolved and that I should make an effort to invite Vicky. My dad insisted that our relatives would talk about why my sister wasn't invited, and this would end up affecting my wedding. However, I knew it was better not to give in to their demands, so I didn't give in to them. I told them it was okay for people to talk behind my back and question my character as long as I was surrounded by people I liked and trusted during my wedding. My mother then asked if my fiancé would be okay with this and also tried to use the in-law card, saying they would judge me for being so incredibly cruel as to exclude my own sister from my wedding. I laughed and informed my parents that my fiancé and my in-laws knew the dynamic of my family, and none of them cared if Vicky was present or not. They pressured me to reconsider, suggesting the importance of family unity and forgiveness, but I didn't budge an inch, knowing I wasn't willing to compromise my well-being to appease others. In the end, we agreed to disagree, each of us holding onto our perspectives. My parents told me they needed to think things over, and we ended our conversation there. I informed my grandparents about this because I felt a little guilty about standing up to my parents, and they fully supported me. My grandparents told me I shouldn't force myself to invite anyone I didn't want there and that my parents, as usual, were trying to make me feel guilty. Since this conversation, I've felt a bit better about my decision and have been distracting myself with wedding preparations since my wedding is fast approaching. Last week, my dad called to inform me that he had thought it over and that he and Mom would no longer be attending the wedding. Before I could react, he continued, saying this also meant he wouldn't be walking me down the aisle. I asked if there was a specific reason, and he informed me that Vicky would be moving to a new place soon, which my parents had helped her find, and since I was excluding her from the wedding, she had decided to throw a housewarming party that same day. So they would attend that instead of my wedding. I couldn't believe what my dad was saying because he wasn't being invited in the first place, let alone walking me down the aisle. But he considered telling me that he had decided not to do it. However, the idea that my own sister's housewarming party took priority over my wedding was a hard blow, continuing the pattern I had felt for years. I simply told him I understood and hung up the call. Though I tried to act brave in front of my dad, the pain of rejection weighed on me deeply. When I told Rob, he was furious at how insensitive my parents could be after they insisted on being invited. It was he who gave me the idea that I should ask my grandfather since he and Grandma had been there for me more than my parents. I agreed, so I called my grandparents and asked if they would be willing to walk me down the aisle at my wedding. I couldn't hold back my emotions while asking my grandfather, "You and Grandma have always been there for me," I said, my voice choked with emotion. "You've been more than just grandparents, you've been like parents to me, and I can't imagine anyone else I would want by my side on my wedding day." My grandfather didn't hesitate before saying yes. He told me how honored he would be to walk me down the aisle and, unlike my parents, wouldn't let me down. His words reassured me, and at that moment, I felt a profound sense of peace. With my grandparents by my side, I knew I had a family that loved me unconditionally and accepted me as I was, with all my imperfections. I also spoke with my in-laws about this, and Rob's parents assured me they didn't mind if my parents didn't attend and that regardless of their presence, they were delighted to witness and support our union. My wedding is in 2 days, and today, I woke up to several missed calls from my dad. I called him back, thinking it was an emergency, and when he answered, he asked if it was true that my grandfather would be walking me down the aisle. I told him it was true, and then my dad got furious, saying how disrespectful it was to have asked my grandfather. I reminded him that he was the one who decided not to come to my wedding, so I didn't understand why he was so upset. My dad continued yelling at me about how he and Mom were only trying to make me see the error of my ways and that they thought declining the invitation would teach me a lesson. He went on to say how he and Mom had raised me and paid for my food and education, so my grandfather had no right to replace him. I tried to reason with him, explaining how my grandparents had been there for me in ways he and Mom never were, but he didn't want to listen. He also told me how I had done nothing but push everyone away and that this was all my fault. I don't think I've done anything wrong in this situation. I suppose anyone would have done the same, but as the subreddit requires me to ask the question, am I the jerk for asking my grandfather to walk me down the aisle instead of my father? Update 1, many have weighed in, and the majority have said I'm not the jerk. I've seen many pieces of advice and suggestions on how to approach this situation. I agree that I need to cut off contact with my parents permanently because their constant indecision is exhausting and starting to affect my mental health. I don't want them in my life when they have consistently shown that Vicky is always their top priority. My parents are selfish, and I've known that for a long time. However, how can a daughter simply stop loving her parents? It's much easier said than done, but it's very hard to do in reality. However, for my peace of mind, I have no other option but to do it so I can enjoy my wedding tomorrow. Update 2, I apologize for the lack of updates this past month, but I've been quite busy since my wedding. First of all, yes, my wedding was wonderful, with my grandfather by my side as I walked down the aisle. Despite my parents' absence, I couldn't have been happier exchanging vows with Rob, committing to spend the rest of our lives together. My friends and I danced the night away, and I can't begin to describe how important it is to keep in touch with your childhood friends no matter what because sometimes they are your chosen family. During the reception, I felt a slight pang realizing my parents weren't there to share this special moment, especially when I saw Rob's parents and cousins giving speeches for him. However, I found solace in knowing I had made the right decision for myself by prioritizing my well-being and happiness. Some of my friends gave speeches, sharing memories of our experiences and the bond that had carried us through good and bad times. In the days following the wedding, Rob and I went on our honeymoon, which his parents paid for as a wedding gift. I spent all my days simply lounging and enjoying time with my husband. I feel so thrilled every time I look at Rob and realize he is now married to me. As I mentioned before, I cut off all contact with my parents, blocking them everywhere. I didn't bother sending them an explanation because, frankly, they don't even deserve it. I have no idea if Vicky really had a housewarming party that day or if it was just an excuse for my parents not to attend my wedding, but at this point, I don't care. I wish them nothing but the best, along with their beloved daughter. Update 3. I had no intention of sharing more after my last update, but something unexpected just happened, and I think you all deserve to know. I hadn't checked my email in the past month due to my wedding and honeymoon, but today, while going through emails, I found an email from Vicky. I don't even know how she found my email address, and it completely caught me off guard. I hesitated about whether to open her email or just delete it unread, but as the saying goes, curiosity killed the cat. Inside was a lengthy message from Vicky expressing her regret over our strained relationship and her desire to reconcile. She acknowledged the mistakes she had made in the past, admitting she had been selfish and immature. Vicky apologized for the pain she had caused me over the years and expressed a genuine desire to make amends. She continued writing about how she was happy for me now that I was married and wished me nothing but the best. She ended the email by begging me not to punish our parents by cutting them off, saying they missed me. Reading her words, I felt a mix of emotions, surprise and skepticism. Part of me wanted to believe that Vicky had truly changed, that she was sincere in her apology and willing to work to repair our relationship. But another part of me remained doubtful, as this seemed too good to be true. However, regardless of what she wrote, I knew for sure that my parents didn't miss me because if they did, they wouldn't have treated me like this all these years. I thought about replying to her, but then I decided not to. After all, forgiveness isn't something to be rushed. It's a process that requires time and reflection. Still, I don't know if I want to have a relationship with her again. I could forgive her, but that doesn't mean we're finally going to be sisters now. To be honest, after my marriage, I no longer feel lonely. I've learned to recognize that I have my loving husband by my side, supportive friends, and the unwavering love of my grandparents. And with their support, I know I can face any challenges that come my way without needing Vicky or my parents in my life. I've done some research and found a good therapist with whom I've booked my first session. I've taken this step so I can address and resolve any past wounds and heal from them. Update 4. I think I did the right thing by not replying to the email mentioned in the last update because now everything has come to light. It turns out Vicky didn't write anything, and it was my parents using her account. That's why the email stressed so much that I forgive my parents because they were the ones who had written it. I know this because I ran into Vicky by chance one day, and when I greeted her, she looked at me with disgust as always. I mentioned the email since I thought my lack of response was the problem, and she told me she hadn't sent anything. She took out her phone and found the email in her sent folder, but swore she hadn't written anything. At that moment, we both realized who the author was since surely some computer at home still had Vicky's session open. I also asked her about the housewarming party, and she said it never happened. So, as I suspected, it was all a lie by my parents. We each went our separate ways, and that was it. Honestly, I don't know who was worse in my life, my sister or my parents, because at this point, my parents' actions are too twisted. At least now everyone will know because I made a post on my Instagram with links to my Reddit, so the whole family and close friends are reading this story.